know what really makes us mad? Is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers? Welcome to Punk Lotto Pod. I'm your co-host, Justin Hensley.
I'm your other co-host, Dylan Hensley.
Did I pause right before I said my last name?
Dylan Hensley.
That's right. We're brothers, and we host a podcast together. And we live in... I was going to make us like the Three Stooges, where we have like bunk beds in the same room. We don't. We live in completely different states. We have wives. Welcome to the show. This is the show where we choose one year at random and select one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk-adjacent album from that year to discuss. And today's episode, we are talking about a record released in the year 1989. And if you head over to our Patreon, you can hear more about that year on our $1 bonus audio. What did we do?
We did a bracketology from 1989 covering not just punk records, because we'll get into it in the charts section and the almost picked section, but 89, weird time for punk rock.
Yeah, it's a very bizarre point in punk history. Probably, I mean, we'll get more into it, but probably one of the more down periods for punk music. I also think there's a lot of similarities to punk today, but we'll get into that more.
Yeah. Let's not jump ahead on the conversation.
Yeah.
You're not going to eat up all our content at the beginning. We got to do
right.
plugs and stuff.
Yeah. So also over on the Patreon, I will be doing a Metalcore Chronicles episode very soon. There were a lot more releases on the year that I'm covering. I'm going to cover the year 1991. So it's taken me a lot longer to get through them all to work on the notes, but getting closer. I'm really hoping I can get this done within a week and record it, because a lot of interesting stuff coming out in 91. The biggest year yet for metalcore, which that will keep happening. Every year I do up until a point will be the biggest year yet for metalcore. But
yeah, I was going to say, I think that is exponential growth.
Yeah. And depending on how long this episode winds up being, I may have to start breaking up years in the future into multiple parts. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But
it's funny. Ostensibly, metalcore is harder to play than hardcore. But more people played metalcore. It was just like, oh yeah, I'm doing that. I'm gonna put these Metallica riffs that I learned in my guitar lessons in high school.
Yeah, there's definitely a point where metalcore becomes the dominant version of hardcore. Really in the 2000s, you really, really get that. It swings kind of back around once like the Death Wish inspired hardcore stuff starts to come through. But yeah, there's a very strong period there where it's like, yeah, metalcore everywhere, and more traditional hardcore is very harder to find.
And it's even like kind of like the Overton window of hardcore moves. It's like what gets called just hardcore is a lot more metallic.
Yeah,
at a certain point.
I mean, that really starts to happen in like the mid 90s.
Yeah,
thanks to like Earth Crisis kind of like
yeah,
turning the genre on its head. Yeah, even Hatebreed too. Like there's a lot of metal in Hatebreed, but we think of them more of as just a hardcore band. But I wonder if I'll have to do any Hatebreed records.
I guess you might.
I might. Yeah. We'll see. Not looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Oh boy. But yeah.
I mean, yeah. I feel like Hatebreed's got to be at least honorary metalcore.
Yeah.
Jamie Jasta was the host of Headbangers Ball.
He was. Yeah, and they play on all these metal festivals. So yeah, we might be getting some Hatebreed in the future. Hooray! But yeah, that's where all of our weekly bonus audio is. But we also have other tiers. We have our $5 producer tier, where you get your name said on the show every single week. So let's shout out our producers right now. So thank you so much to Dave Brown, host of the podcast One Band, Five Songs, and writer of the blog Oklahoma Lefty. Thank you to Zach in Oregon. Thank you to Steve Long, host of the podcast Rebel Nerd Radio. Steve has renamed his podcast after the 200th episode from Rebel Rock Radio to Rebel Nerd Radio. I think it's to kind of be more all encompassing with nerd culture stuff instead of specifically just Star Wars, but And then thank you to Jason W., writer of the newsletter Songs About Chocolate and Girls. We got a little hint of one coming soon in the Discord there, and it'll be a fun one. I'm very curious to hear his thoughts on that band. And we have our $10 tier where you get to choose the album we devote an entire episode to. So patreon.com/punklautopod.
And the producers also get not just their name said.
That's right. Thank you for reminding me, because we just recorded this and released it earlier this week. But the producers also get an exclusive monthly bonus audio that is only available for the producers. And it is a episode that we have fully produced, music clips and everything, researched, edited, where we focus on an EP. And we will put a poll together every month for the producers to vote for and choose the EP they want us to discuss. Dylan and I will do the selecting, obviously, but we essentially will let the producers determine which one of those that we're going to talk about. And we don't know what we're doing yet because we haven't done enough episodes to figure out what our poll is going to be. But yeah, if you want to vote in that poll and help decide what we talk about and get that piece of audio, we did the first one we did was on Jawbreaker's Chesterfield King. Great way to start it off. We got some great feedback from it. I think the producers are happier with that than the listening clip. So listening clip was fun, but it was a little more loosey-goosey, tough to schedule. But
yeah, I'm glad that we talked about this, on that episode. But I'm glad we figured out a way to kind of bring the EP section of the show back in some form or another. And I think making it, just like a monthly episode of, hey, here's your extended play. It's a good way to get those important records, short form releases talked about on the show, because there's plenty of classic punk EPs. And I think, doing it monthly, that gives us a good spread to where we're not gonna run out of the classic great stuff.
Yeah.
And wind up having to talk about obscure EPs by bands that did nothing but one EP, two EPs. Yeah,
I was trying to think of it. I think the last episode we did with an EP was actually a one right before COVID. I think it was the Orchid episode we did with Paul DiCiccio, and we did an EP on that one, but I can't remember what the EP was. Do you?
Well, no, I don't. I don't remember at all. Well, we also recreated our first Lost episode with an album and an EP.
Oh, that's true. That would have been the most recent one of those we did. And we have done some episodes that was on an EP.
Yeah.
There's the Bangles episode with the members of Bat Fangs and now members of Superchunk. Oh, that reminds me. I saw footage of Jason playing with Superchunk in October of last year, which would have been after Betsy had started playing with them. So interesting. I kind of thought Jason was out when John was out, but he was probably just busy with other stuff.
Jason's got a full schedule playing REM covers.
Yeah, with Michael Shannon.
And I guess he'll have the Bob Mould band tour.
Yeah, because he's on the record too.
Because they're going to do that full tour for that. So
yeah,
maybe it's just when he has time, he'll do Superchunk. John was the only one that was I'm done. My heart's not in it anymore.
Yeah, which was weird. That everybody in the band was I think the band was kind of blindsided by it too. Because it was just I'm over it was kind of the tone of that. It's over it. I mean, I get it. If you're not into it anymore, it's one thing, but I'm sick of this shit.
Mac never lets me pick the songs.
Yeah. In the van. It's not that they're a super touring band either, too. That's funny.
I meant for the set list, not
Oh, I know. But I made it different.
Yeah. Riffing.
Bob lets me do what I want.
Bob doesn't let anybody do what they want.
No, that's true. That was the problem with Husker Du.
Yeah. You fully are doing what Bob wants when you are playing with Bob.
John Darnielle lets me do what I want.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Yeah. I really want to focus on my comedy career. Okay. I don't know why I'm something about John Worster always kind of annoyed me, despite being one of my all-time favorite bands. He was always my least favorite part of the band.
I love all my children equally.
I don't care for Joe. Okay, let's go for real. So all of that, like I said, patreon.com/punklautopod. All right, this week it is your turn to choose. So I gave you the year 1989, and previously we have covered Start Today by the Gorilla Biscuits back at 246. Episode 214, we did Hard Volume by the Rollins Band. Episode 140, we did No Control by Bad Religion. And we talked about all three of those on the Bracketology. In episode 134, we did Spy Rock Road by the Lookouts. We did that with PJ Sykes of the bands Hoax Hunter, and his current stuff is just under his name too now, right? And then we did in episode 43, we did Shudder to Think's Curses, Spells, Voodoo, Mooses, and the Luna Chicks Sugar Love EP. So it's back in our old format with an album and an EP. So we've hit 89 a few times. And what records were you considering for us to talk about for this week's episode?
So I talked about it being kind of a weird time period.
It is.
Punk. There was certainly notable stuff that we've talked about before on the show that kind of like cut into my options. I just wasn't stoked by a lot of what I was seeing. And there's good stuff that I didn't really even consider that I would probably consider in the future. And, we'll kind of hit some of that stuff when we dig into the charts. But like, just like what mood I was in, I can't really tell you. When I look at what I was considering, it was kind of weird and it was a little bit all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah, when you sent me your batch, I was like, well, I know what I like the best. So I just ranked them in the order that I liked and then let you decide from there. It was definitely an odd batch.
And I was like, is this one of those, I was kind of thinking like, is this one of those years where we really might get outside of punk? I think in the future it might be. I do think, I wound up picking something that makes the most sense. I think I made the right choice, but it was kind of just like the things that were jumping out to me that I was interested in listening to and maybe talking about this week. Nothing Face by Voivod kind of popped out because I think it's a really good record. It's weird, technical, proggy thrash metal. It has the post-punk tag as a secondary. I can see it being a little bit of an influence, but ultimately I was like, I like the record. I think it's cool. I think it might be possible to do metal records from time to time on this show, and this would be one that I think could be of interest to certain kinds of punks. But ultimately, I was just like, there's other choices that feel more appropriate. And I kind of just flinched on that one. I did end up listening to kind of most of it, though, this week. Because I was like, I haven't listened to that in a while. And it's a good record.
I listened to their 86 record, Roar. It's spelled out really long with lots of R's and O's and A's. So I'm not saying it like them. But I really enjoyed that record because I was listening to it for the Dance of Days series I was doing on the year 1986. And that may come back one day. Who knows? But it might be dead. Maybe if there's a week where you can't be here and then I'll maybe put one together. But I really enjoyed that record, though. It was pretty good. I mean, it was thrashy, very crossover. 86 was heavy on that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They hadn't got really proggy yet at this stage, but I enjoyed it. It was a fun record. And it's like kind of considered one of their like lower of the classic period rated records. So even then it's still not like a terrible rating, and I think even like the lowest period seems to be the like 2000s, but even then they kind of come back in the 2010s and are still fairly well regarded. So I also love that almost all their covers are red. It's pretty cool. They have a visual motif in that robot skeleton guy.
Yeah,
that's always in their art. Who would win the fight, that guy or the integrity head?
I mean, man, a demon?
Yeah.
Or a cyborg?
Very close.
I don't know what kind of technology the Voivod Nothing Face robots have. I considered Bizarro by the Wedding Present because I enjoy those Wedding Present records. And I also thought it might be timely because I think they're doing the Bizarro anniversary tour right now. So it'd be like 35?
89. Yeah.
Yeah, right? 35-ish years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it just like wound up being this year because of, whatever, just like scheduling and which I haven't decided if I'm going to go to that show. And maybe I should. I just kind of didn't. Eventually I'll do a Wedding Present record. I was just maybe not feeling it in this exact moment. I feel like it's going to have to be any wedding present record, I'm gonna hope there's a story.
Yeah.
And maybe I should figure out what's the wedding present record that has a story and like pick that one when it comes up sometime. Just because I'm like, they seem like they were just a band that was around for a long time and then stopped and then came back, and then they've just been around
Yeah, they're
kind
one
of
of those-
off and on for like 40 years.
They're one of those bands like the Mekons who just have like a shit ton of records, but I don't know that there's like that much of a story about the band. They're just like, yeah, we just, kept making music forever.
And we all got along.
Yeah. We lost
Oh,
members, but it's because they, they had to move on with their lives and do other things. But
Yeah. He got a really good job offer. Couldn't turn it
yeah,
down.
he couldn't turn it down. He our 3-week tour that we do every couple years isn't enough. So
I considered the Bob Mould and Grant Hart solo records that came out in '89, Workbook and Intolerance, Bob and Grant's solo records. They're both really good records. I would say that Intolerance is more of what you expect from a Grant Hart solo record, because every Grant Hart solo record's weird.
yeah.
And Workbook is probably the last thing you expected Bob to do immediately after Husker Du. It's like the folk rock record.
Yeah.
Real jangly, folky, lots of acoustic. He ran so far from the Bob Mould guitar sound, and then like realized his mistake and immediately went and put like the hardest record he's ever made out after Workbook.
Yeah.
It's like, if it were Black Sheets of Rain, I'd pick that one. But because it's Workbook, I was just like, it's like the least representative other than like the dance records of Bob Mould. And Intolerance, it's a good record. It's not a great record, but it's a good record. And like, I feel like that would just be an episode where we probably just need to go more into like Grant's whole career.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's not likely that like a guest is going to choose one of Grant's other records, Like that's the Grant Hart record to do, I think. And yeah,
Maybe.
so you think there's something else that's a little more? I don't know. I think that's
I
the only one I've ever really seen talked about.
Yeah, I guess that is the big one. It's the one he did. Good News for Modern Man is pretty well regarded. Intolerance, I think, is the one because it's the first one. And then it took forever before he did anything else. Like 10 years. He really took like 10 years between all of his solo records.
Well, he did those 2 Nova Mob records too.
Yeah.
Those were like 91 and 94. So, I mean, he did some other stuff, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess Nova Mob is also a band we could talk about at some point.
It's a name that I kind of forget is associated with him because I've seen the name, but I forget that it's his band.
Yeah. But, yeah, we'll get into the record I picked and why. But,
yeah.
Not a lot was really, I don't know. Not a lot of it was piquing my interest.
Yeah. So I guess this is where we could talk about 89. So 1989, we are 3 years past the point where everybody says punk died. All the old heads were like, yeah, punk died in 86. And it's kind of true in the sense that all the old punk bands, either the ones that stuck around, changed their sound. Most of them went to crossover thrash. Like a good chunk of them did. Some went full hair, like SSD and Gangrene, and who was the other one that did that? TSOL, And then a lot of the bands just broke up too. Like they were done at that point. And then the members go on to do other things. I'd say a good chunk of them kind of all went into the burgeoning alternative rock scene for the most part. Or, like the DC bands they went and did a million new bands after, their first ones were done. But it's all like the same people kind of doing whatever Ian MacKay's doing. Like, oh, we're doing that now? Okay, let's do that. So yeah, in the late 80s is a very strange period. And the bands who did stick around, it's kind of like nobody really stuck with their original sound. They all did something different. And so it's a weird period. College rock, alternative rock is becoming more popular in general. I mean, metal is still as popular as it ever is. Metal is pretty consistently popular throughout the entire 80s. Hair metal just becomes a little bit more mainstream. That's the main big difference. But, thrash is very much a consistent genre throughout the entire 80s. So it's tough. It's tough to kind of like look at 89 and be like, what's here? What's popping off? And it seems like the most like vital, most exciting time period or scene is maybe the New York scene at this time. Like it's still we have a combination of youth crew and like New York hardcore are still very, very strong during this time period. The Northeast. Oh, go ahead.
I just wasn't feeling New York hardcore.
No,
none of it was. I was like, we did Gorilla Biscuits. I'm like, we should do the Judge record at some point.
Yeah,
but that's kind of it.
Youth of Today, we did the one record too. It's like,
yeah,
I mean, you can only do so many Ray Capo records, and
I don't know. It's like I'm not gonna pick a Killing Time record.
I totally understand why indie rock becomes the de facto punk genre during the 90s. It's because I guess at this stage the terms punk.
Well, skate punk.
Okay, yeah, skate punk is that's probably the other one. We go in SoCal, we got skate punk everywhere. Skate punk out the wazoo. That is the big thing. Bad Religion is really like marking their territory, and then so many copycats coming out of that scene, which I guess they all kind of are more indebted to like the Adolescents, but still. But if you look at like SST during this period, it's like a bunch of funk and blues bands and played by punks.
Just garbage Grateful Dead knockoffs.
Yeah. Like I said, Discord is interesting. Like Fugazi is starting in 89, right?
Yeah, 89, probably a really good year for EPs.
Yeah, actually.
Because I think there's, the first Fugazi EP?
I think that's right, because the repeater's 90. So yeah, it's got to be the singles, or the EPs are out by 89.
Margin Walker was 89, and the self-titled was 88. Yeah.
So DC is doing well during this period. There's a lot of surrounding bands, a lot of emo core bands still playing, like the bands who kind of sprung up after Rites of Spring, or even part of it, same time period. So emo's kind of doing its own thing, but it's a small kind of like subset genre. I do love, that is my favorite stuff from this time period, is the emo records during this era.
Yeah, there's like a 3 record, and I'm trying to think of what emo records specifically.
A lot of EPs, I bet.
I mean, emo post-hardcore, Jason, you've got a Bitch Magnet record. Yeah, Shudder to Think we talked about. That's kind of in the same world.
Yeah.
I guess maybe not the strongest year in terms of like emo core. There's like the Soul Side record, and that 3 record's probably the strongest.
Yeah. I was just had it in my head. There's something else kind of going on during the same time period.
Grunge.
I mean, yeah, if you go to the Pacific Northwest, we have all your grunge bands are starting up there. We have Bleach by Nirvana of 89. We have all the other bands. Like a lot of the famous grunge bands hadn't started yet because they were all still in their other bands at this point. Their first bands, like your Mother Love Bones and your Green Rivers and those kind of bands, your Mud Honeys, like all that early grunge stuff.
Going back to the emo EP, I pulled the EPs just to see. Whack and Blight by Jawbreaker came out. There's an Ignition EP. So that stuff's going on. Some majority of One stuff came out.
We have the Bay Area during this period. That is something that's happening. The Lookouts. We have Operation Ivy. We have like Sam I Am's around. Jawbreaker's around. A lot of those bands. So the Berkeley scene is kind of like percolating, but they're not there yet. Like Operation Ivy, besides that record did Boffo BO. Like it did so well, but it's still a growing scene. Like it hasn't quite gotten national yet. So it is. It's a bunch of little pockets kind of happening at the same time, all about to take off.
Yeah. Some math rock, some noisy Chicago area kind of stuff.
Yeah, which is kind of a continuation of what was already happening in that area.
Yeah.
Yeah, noise rock's about to have a really big moment too. So yeah, it's a turn of the decade. So like we're about to get a bunch of different stuff, but the year itself, it's like I don't know if this is a super strong year.
Yeah, it's just not. It's not the most thrilling. Like I said, I was just in like a weird mood, and it was like, and so this is one of those. It's one of those years where I like to look at kind of like what you could call like benchmark punk. So like something that sounds, the kinds of bands that sound the closest to 77 punk that are making records at this time. You've got Bad Religion, you've got S&M Airlines by NoFX, you've got a Naked Ray Gun record, Cherry Knoll by Leatherface.
Yeah, that's true. The UK is doing something right now too. We have Leatherface and we have Snuff at this point too,
Yeah.
and that UK scene. That UK scene is actually about to have a pretty strong time period too. Cherry Knoll, it wasn't huge, but still.
But it's a small group of bands. There's just a few bands that are doing something that you could reasonably just call punk. Wakey Wakey by Toy Dolls comes out.
Yeah.
Where you don't necessarily have to give it a subgenre. You can just say, yeah, they're like a punk rock band. And that's sufficient. Like, sure, NoFX, Bad Religion, skate punk band. You know, you can break things down into smaller groups, but I think there's something that's kind of essential, kind of core to punk rock that those bands are doing. There's not many bands that are in that lane. Everybody's doing kind of something else. Post-hardcore, noise rock. They're just too far into another subgenre.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, looking at this list, it's not great. Like, I mean, we have some weird bands that are sticking around that were part of the original wave. Like, there's a Public Image Limited record in '89. You know, there's a Pure Ubu record. You know, there's a Wire record. You know, there's like bands that were part of that original kind of wave of things. Like, they still have stuff coming out, but they're not really their essential records. You know, they're not the ones that people really go to. Maybe that Public Image Limited, but I mean, we have spin-off bands, new bands. You know, we have your Fire Hoses and Rollins bands, and like all Roy's Revenge came out that year. And yeah, it's a very undecided time period. Yeah, I'm just scrolling through and I'm kind of like, what would I choose to talk about myself? I don't know. Like if okay, something we have
it far enough back here on the charts before I gave up, I might have suggested the Crucified
self-titled record. Yeah. That is an important record for a completely different subset.
Yeah.
Of punks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a real specific scene.
Very specific scene. But also probably one of the most contemporary sounding, like kind of like in the moment, even though like crossover thrash is like had been around for a while already by '89. It's still strong. You know, like there's still DRI records, you know, there's still a lot of crossover thrash stuff. So it's like the most relevant of the Christian punks and hardcore, because like anything else from that time period is still like weird and kind of like, yeah, it's a lot of weird actually. Like there's less underground stuff happening around during this time period, and some, I mean, I guess Altar Boys might still be around at the stage, but like, or Adam Again, like that kind of stuff. But even that stuff didn't feel super relevant by '89. You know, it felt like a couple years behind. Like it's like, oh, they're still doing U2 when everybody else is. I mean, U2's still huge, but it's not new anymore.
Yeah, the Crucified's one of those few moments where like Christian punks were actually pretty on top of things.
Yeah, they were tapped in to what
and
was
it's
happening.
because Mark Salomon was listening to new music as it was coming out. I mean, I guess all of those guys were, you know.
Yeah.
There's the Groovy Ghoulies. What is that? The first record? Appetite for Adrenochrome?
Yeah. It's rough. Have you ever listened to it?
Yeah.
It's rough. Yeah. It's recorded pretty bad. The songs aren't great. And Kepi sounds like Kepi, but, you know, not great. Yeah, it's not the most exciting time period. But honestly, I'd probably pick something weird for this year. It's just the kind of year where you're just like, look, the big names aren't doing it. Might as well dig in and find something a little more obscure to talk about. You know, like maybe I would choose like that Mega City 4 record, you know, that came out, just to see, you know, what's going on with that band. What's that band's deal? You know. Well, let's get into the record you did actually select for us to talk about, and that is Brave Noise by the band Moving Targets. on the band. Moving Targets were from North Shore, Massachusetts. They formed in 1981. This was released on Tang Records, and it is the band's second album. I couldn't find a date for this one. I couldn't even find a month for this one. It just said 89 when it came out. The person on this record is Chuck Freeman on bass and backing vocals, Pat Brady on drums and percussion, and Ken Chambers on guitar and vocals. And the record was recorded at the legendary Fort Apache Studios in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is, I believe, just right outside of Boston, where every Boston band recorded in. Legit everyone recorded there. The record is produced by the band as well as co-produced by Lou Giordano, who the band worked with on their previous record. And he had produced tons of Boston bands like SSD Control, the FUs, the Proletariat, Mission to Burma, Gangrene, Jerry's Kids, DYS. And the very same year that he produced this record, he produced Bob Mould's Workbook. And he had previously worked with Husker Du and recorded with them. I don't know which record exactly, but he did one of their albums. And he also has a very long career in production. Just you look at that guy's discogs and just look at everything he's ever done. So much stuff. And then it was assistant engineered by Carl Plaster, who was a Boston-based engineer who he goes on to have a pretty good career too. So a little bit of the Boston scene kind of going on here at this time. But before we get into the backstory, what made you choose this record for us to talk about?
Well, it's very good.
Very important key.
I was like, oh, well, that's a good record. That's easy. I just recently listened to their debut record, Burning in Water. Would have talked about that on An I'm Listening that we did not too long ago. So it was kind of relevant. It was in my head, in my mind. Really enjoyed listening to that record. So I was like, okay, we'll do the next one. That's pretty easy. I've heard the record before. Like I was pretty familiar with it.
Yeah.
And they're a really interesting band, because they have never really had their due. So I thought, maybe someone hasn't heard them and we could talk about them and talk about this record, and someone might find something they really like. Because I really liked them. I hadn't heard them. I didn't hear anything about them until their second comeback record in 2020. And I remember it coming out, and I just checked it out based on maybe the description, and it was put out by Dead Broke. It was why it was on my radar. So I was like, oh, let me go listen to that. And I'm listening to it. I'm like, this is really good. And I'm looking into it. I was like, well, who are they? Where are they from? I'm like, oh, they've literally been around since 1980, the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing this sound a long time ago. And I was like, why have I never heard their records before? Why are they not more of a well-known band? I don't have an answer for that, but
we can speculate a little bit.
Yeah.
I think we'll get into that a little bit.
Yeah.
I think there's some factors kind of going into it why they weren't the most well-known band. But yeah, like I said, we'll get into that.
But everything I've heard by them, and I've kind of, there's the 91 record and the first comeback record I'm not really familiar with, but I have heard most of the stuff they've put out. I think they're an impressive band in how much time was between their 93 record and their comebacks for them to just pick up right where they left off and sound like this and have all these great songs. And we're just this is such a consistent band that it's wrong that I hadn't heard them until 2020, because the exact sound, what they do is tailor-made for me to listen to.
Oh yeah, this is Dylan Core all the way.
So yeah, it was a pretty easy pick in terms of it's a weird year. There's not much else that's screaming at me, and this is definitely one of the better records, one of the best records from '89.
Yeah,
and I felt it fits our show better than anything else I was considering. This is in line with what we talk about a lot.
Mm.
So I figured there'd be something to say about it.
Yeah, I was trying to think of how I got into them. It probably would have been around the same time as you, the second reunion record. I do recall seeing that they had done a split on Dead Broke. I think it's between the first reunion record and this one, and the second reunion record on Dead Broke. And that might have been the first time I took note of their name. But even then, I don't think I even tried to listen to them at that stage. It would be Humbucker is the record that we would have both probably started with. And it's very similar to when I started listening to the band Greensleep, who put out a record in 2017 on Dead Broke. And I was like, oh, this is really good. And then like read a little bit about them. And I was like, oh, they were like a New York band in the 90s, like mid 90s, who, had like a couple releases. And I was like, oh, this band's great. I went back and listened to their like big 90s album. That record was great. And I was like, man, this is like buried. Like, why did this not get much attention? And I didn't look too deep into their story, but I imagine they just didn't go outside of New York very often. And it was just a case of like a similar thing happening once I like looked into Moving Targets. I was like, oh, this band's been around forever. Like they were a band in the 80s, like at a peak moment in the 80s too. And I can't remember which of the original records I listened to first. It might have been this one. It might have been the next one though. But yeah, I'm
the first two records are reissued together. So Brave and it's like they're listed backwards. So they have Brave Noise first, and then they put Burning in Water on the last half of it.
Yeah.
Kind of understand. I guess Brave Noise was the bigger record, but I don't know why they didn't just put it in chronological order.
I do know the reason is it was for CD, and the first record had never been put out on CD. Okay. And so they did this record and that record together as a single CD. This was the new record. It came out the same year as the final version. So they were just like, hey, we never did put that out on CD, and we can put more music on a CD than we can an LP. So that's why they put the first record on the CD version, not the cassette version. They could have done it with the cassette version too. It would have worked, but it would have been a long tape, I guess. Longer than tapes tended to be. So that's why they
gotta wait for that to rewind.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Let's look a little bit into the backstory. So they form way back in 1981. The band initially they just start off as covers, playing in their garage or their bedrooms and everything. They were into stuff like the Clash and the Sex Pistols, and they started just doing covers. And eventually, once they started writing their own songs, they tried to get the attention of the band Bad Brains, because they would do some Bad Brains covers. And then Bad Brains played a couple shows in Massachusetts around this time period. And they went to the shows, and they were like, they had their demo tape, and they found the band manager and was like, hey, can you listen to this and, see what, if we could get on a show. And a couple weeks go by, they get a phone call, or one of the members gets a phone call, and it's the band manager for Bad Brains. And they're like, hey, I lost your tape, but could you play me your music over the phone? And so they call, I think it's Ken who got the phone call. And then they called the other members, and they all ran over immediately. And then they literally played the songs as a band over the phone.
When the phone up to the a tape deck.
And then he was like, good enough. I mean, I'm sure he was just like, all right, how competent does this sound? Is probably really what he was thinking. He's like, he'll know right away if it's going to be like good enough to open. And he was like, yeah, good. You guys, you can come open for the Bad Brains at CBGB's, and we'll pay you $100. It's like, fuck, that's pretty good. Pretty good start. He's like, you don't have to be today. Incredible. Do what? Say it again?
That would be good today.
Yeah, $100. Hell yeah.
Oh yeah, you can open for this big band and get $100.
Yeah. Yeah. So then they, kind of start doing their own thing. They're a band for a little bit. They don't have a lot in common with a lot of the other Boston hardcore bands at the time. Ken was listening to college radio, so he wasn't listening to a lot of hardcore. The rest of the band was, but he started hearing Mission of Burma on college radio and kind of took a little bit of influence from that. But they wind up breaking up in 1983. And in that time, Ken starts playing in some other bands, new bands, trying to get things going. And he starts a band called Smash Pattern with Chuck Freeman. And a couple songs from that band wind up getting used for Moving Targets later. So after a year, they get back together. And the way that he described it, Ken described it, was that they basically were starting over. Like, because their earlier material was much more hardcore. And they're like, let's start over. Like, I love Mission of Burma. I love Husker Du. Let's do something kind of like that. And so they start playing together. They start doing this style of music. They eventually get their songs on a compilation called Bands That Could Be God, which was like a bunch of Boston bands that appeared on a comp together. And they had like multiple songs on it. They wind up releasing their debut album, Burning in Water, in 1986. They get some critical praise. They're not super widely known, but they do get enough of attention in Europe that they could go do a European tour. And when they get back from that tour, they break up in 1987. Ken would go on to play in the band Bullet La Volta, which is a pretty important band that some of the members of like Chavez come out of later. So he plays in that band for a little while, playing like second guitar. And after he gets a phone call from the owner of Tang Records, and he's like, "Hey, so like you have these other songs that you wrote, but you never recorded. Why don't you go record it and we'll put it out on the label?" Dead band. He just liked it. And he assumed he saw the songs live, and that's how he knew they even existed, or he heard maybe some demos of it. But he's just like, "I want some more Moving Targets. Hey, why don't you go record another Moving Targets record for me and I'll put it out?" That's basically what it was. And they're like, "Okay, yeah, let's do that." So at this time, they had they had a bass player in the band who had moved to Florida. His name was also Pat. There were two Pats in Moving Targets when they started. Very Boston. But that Pat moved to Florida. And so they're like, "Okay, I'm going to bring in Chuck from Smash Pattern to come in and play in the band." And he basically says, this record would have never existed if the guy from Tang hadn't called me up and said, "Hey, why don't you record another record for me?" So they go in the studio, they record this record. It's not a particularly like super eventful story for recording purposes, but it is kind of neat that that's how this record came to be. And that's kind of like the main story kind of up to this point. Young hardcore band, the TLDR version, young hardcore band, did some rough recordings, play locally, break up, get back together, new sound, Husker Du, Mission of Burma, go tour, put out a record, break up, start another band, plays another band, get a phone call, "Hey, re-record this record." And that's kind of where they went. They stayed together for a good stretch there after they reunite for the first time. This band has 2 reunions in their history, 2 major reunions, but yeah, that's kind of like the main story behind it. And we were talking a little bit about like why didn't this band get bigger or more well known? And I think that's the story. That's part of why. They started as one thing, they broke up. Like if they started as a hardcore band and they played more traditional kind of sounding hardcore, and they would have taken off at that point, they might have been more remembered. Because then they would have pivoted to this other sound. Like Husker Du starts as like a more straightforward hardcore band, and they just evolved their sound over time to become like this legendary band. So yeah, I think because there were so many stops and starts, they record their first LP and break up. Also, their first LP is in 86, which is also the year punk died. So it's already like past the sell by date. But the style of music they're playing, because it's so Mission of Burma and Husker Du inspired, like it could have had a shelf life beyond that point. But he was also, they break up and they get back together and do that record. He's playing in Bullet La Volta at the same time as Moving Targets, so that's part of it too. So it wasn't like this is my focus. He winds up like quitting Bullet La Volta after like a couple years. But he's like running both bands at the same time. So yeah, it's just kind of
I think he was in Bullet La Volta probably till 90.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So yeah, like all the stops and starts and it not being like their focus and coming out at the wrong time. I think it's a wrong time record, especially this one. Like this is 89. Like Husker Du's done at this point, We have Bob Mould and Grant Hart records in 89, but Mission of Burma had been done for a while already at this point, right? So Tang was keeping a lot of that stuff in print, and they were like finding new things to put out by them all the time. But the band being active was they were already on to their next project. I can't remember the name of what was it? Bird Songs of the Mesozoic. Yeah, they were doing that stuff. They had a record in '89. We should listen to that to see what that sounded like. Fault Line. It's avant-prog, jazz rock, Canterbury scene. I don't think we would have liked it, but
yeah, it maybe it is a little bit of a wrong time. It is and it isn't, because there's other people doing not dissimilar things at this time that go on to be something. Tang also was putting out Lemonheads records, so another Boston band doing, I think, something not too far from this Moving Targets record.
Yeah,
especially earlier Lemonheads, and then just kind of like, and where they go, I think it's like a pretty similar direction of like power pop. Lemonheads leans way more into like the pop side of it,
less punk. Yeah,
but Goo Goo Dolls are putting out records at this time. I don't know who's listening to them.
Yeah, it's Minneapolis.
They were on
they're on Metal Blade, right?
On Metal Blade, yeah. Goo Goo Dolls are from Buffalo.
Oh, they're not actually from Minneapolis. That's right. I always think of them like, because they're doing the replacements things so much that it's just like, oh, that's right. They're not from Minneapolis. Yeah, they had
You're thinking of Soul Asylum.
That's who I'm thinking of. Who's doing stuff at this time too?
Who is also very active.
Yeah, Goo Goo Dolls had done they done the Nightmare on Elm Street soundtrack at this time?
What would that have
That's
been?
91, so it's a couple years away. But yeah.
And I was thinking of Goo Goo Dolls quite a bit in listening to this record, because I was listening to Brave Noise and I'm like, there's stuff on here that like I feel like Resnick was probably like, oh, you do that.
I don't know. I don't know if they would have even been on their radar.
I don't know. They're from New York, Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance they played Boston and could have got hooked up with Moving Targets at a show or something, but I don't know. I never saw any connection anywhere I read, but
and I don't. So I talked about this when I talked about Burning in Water, and Burning in Water, maybe that record more of a case of this than Rave Noise, but like they're not too far off from what's going on in DC. I don't think they're that different from Dag Nasty or Embrace, or it's like Embrace and Rites of Spring, were such short-lived bands, and then like Fugazi is just going in such a different direction, and DC is just the dog being wagged by the tail that is Fugazi.
Yeah.
It's just everyone follows them, so like maybe a little bit of a wrong time. It's just that DC is in there listening to jazz records and driving vintage cars era. Though starting to get there.
We mentioned them before, but the Hated, put out every song in '89, and I do hear a lot of similarities in what the Hated are doing. Like the Hated are coming from, they both have a mutual influence of the Husker Du. Like they're both equally influenced by Husker Du. The difference between the Hated and Moving Targets is also more influenced by Mission of Burma, whereas the Hated are more influenced by Rites of Spring and Embrace. So the secondary influence is like the thing that makes them different from each other, but there's a lot in common there.
I would also say this: Moving Targets, if they were a Bay Area band, instead of a Boston band, they could be Jawbreaker.
They'd be sharing bills with Jawbreaker and Sam I Am.
They might be more remembered.
I was gonna say they might be more well known because that scene was growing at that time, and Boston was already a booming scene at this stage. Like the Pixies are on their second LP at this stage,
Yeah. Galaxy 500's on their second record.
Yeah, and Lemonheads, put out records too. So it's just
which Lemonheads kind of also broke up and got back together around the same time period too. I wonder if Tang did the same thing with them, where they're like, "You got more songs, record them."
Yeah, I could see that.
It's probably the same exact story, and then that's how we get to Evan Dando taking his shoes off at the Jawbreaker show. It's funny how you said they broke up and they got back together, and he's saying, like, Ken is like, I really like Mission of Burma and Husker Du. Let's do something like that. And then they go and literally do that.
It is. It's like a mix of those two things, like head on, like that.
And it's like, how rare is it for someone to say, I want to do a band that sounds like X meets Y?
Yeah.
And then do it. And it's like the proportions are perfect. It's like exactly the right combination of elements that are such no-brainer. Like it's just like Reese's Cup flavors. You know, it's peanut butter and chocolate. I'm like, obviously.
It is funny because like when you think about the music that Husker Du and Mission of Burma were making, like there are a lot more similarities than you initially think, you know?
Yeah.
Mission of Burma were definitely more post-punk influenced and Husker Du were more power pop influenced, but like they're kind of approaching their music in a similar way. Like they're writing their songs in a way that works, you know, in tandem.
Yeah, it's definitely like, I mean, you said Moving Targets being Dylan core. I'm like, yeah, I mean, it is. Like, in me in college listening to, not even connecting the dots, but just listening to shitloads of Mission of Burma and Husker Du
Yeah.
all the time. And not like, you know, not connecting the wires, not plugging the pieces together. It's like, they're both kind of scratching the same itch. And you just don't think of it because they're such titanic, you know, figures within their respective like scenes and who they influenced, and they kind of influenced different people, but then here's this one overlap where it's like they both equally influenced one band,
and they as a band they don't overlap that much, you know. Like Husker Du is around before Mission of Burma break up, but like it's not peak Husker Du yet, you know. So like they're essentially done by the time Husker Du takes their, you know, their biggest leaps. And so that also kind of makes it where you don't put them together sonically. It's very similar to the line in in High Fidelity where he says like, Jesus Mary Chain picked up where your precious Echo and the Bunnymen left off. It's very like similar to that kind of concept. It's like Husker Du picks up where Mission of Burma leaves off, despite not doing the same thing. And that by that logic, Moving Targets picks up where Husker Du leaves off.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, they're still a band when they put their first record out, but by their second record, you know, Husker Du's done. And Bob and Grant are doing solo records the same year. So, and they went and got the guy who recorded with Husker Du, too. They were like, we want to use you because you worked with Husker Du, and we want to do kind of that thing. So, yeah, it's really kind of cool. And I also think there's a little bit of Minutemen in here, too. I don't think it's like as obvious. It's more of how the record is kind of structured.
Yeah.
Especially those instrumental tracks.
Yeah.
There's like 3 instrumental tracks on this record. And those kind of feel like, that's a little Minutemen. Especially that last one that was like all... No. Yeah, I think it's the last one. It's written by Chuck. Like written and all performed by Chuck.
But even Mission of Burma have, you know, instrumentals or long stretches of instrumental parts of songs. And like Husker Du certainly had their like, you know, what you might call a buffer track instrumentals and little weird experimentations. And
do you think this record needed 3 of these instrumentals?
Maybe not. It might be just a few too many, but like one too many, but I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Because, and I get where they were coming from with the ideas. And like, I think sometimes you write something on the guitar and it doesn't, it depends on how it all comes together, and you just will have kind of a succession of riffs that come together, and it's just like there's no really natural place for a vocal to be. And I think the instrumentals on here are strong instrumentals.
They are good instrumentals.
Like they have pretty big melodies. Like they're doing what a vocal would do already. So they don't really need it. Like they do with their instrumentals what's kind of odd, I guess, for like when punk bands do little instrumental filler things, and like they're not doing that so much. They're doing songs. Like this is beginning to end songs. Like they're written the way you would write a song that you would sing. They're just not singing anything on it. Whereas I think a lot of bands will do like the instrumental thing where they're just like, I had a wacky idea and I'm just going to do 30 seconds of it, you know?
Yeah.
Or like just doing like really experimental and noisy stuff. Like Husker Du would do like the backwards tape stuff, and or Mission of Burma would do the tape manipulation.
Yeah. Or even like the Hated at this time, they have songs that are instrumental, and they have songs that are like, it's almost entirely instrumental song, but at the end of the song, he's just going like, oh, in the song. So it's like, they kind of did the same thing too, which I guess that's the Husker Du that they're drawing from too. So that makes sense. Yeah.
It's just Moving Targets is doing like, they're doing like if the Ventures were a punk band kind of instrumentals instead of like, we're going to do a spiritual jazz freak out on the whole D side of the record. So it's maybe just odd and seems a little bit out of place, but they do there's instrumentals on the Reunion records, so it's kind of something they always do.
Yeah, I think they don't do it on the first record, but yeah, once it's introduced into the band, yeah.
So it's just like, I get it. I get where they're going with it. It's something they kind of stuck with, and sometimes, I can see it just being, like I said, they just wrote it and they're like, I just think this could just be instrumental. I don't think I need to put words on this.
It is surprising when that's like track 2 is an instrumental song.
Yeah.
Like, that's the part where I'm just like, whoa, you put this early, I almost wonder if you would put it first, if it would make a little more sense, but the song they put first is a better opener for the record. I know we keep saying like, oh, it's Husker Du, Mission to Burma mixed together, and it's like, I don't want that to come across as redundant, like it's like derivative, because it's not. That's not really what I'm thinking. It's just like it's a could be filed next to kind of situation more than anything. Like they took both those sounds, kind of mixed them up in a way that feels unique and doesn't feel like, they want to, okay, this is their copycat Husker Du song, this is their copycat Mission to Burma song. No, they just mixed up the elements of those sounds so well that they kind of became their own thing that just works well in sequencing. They go well in a playlist together,
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's, I don't know, maybe I just listen to like so much classic country where everybody's doing literally the same thing from record to record, where it's just like, oh yeah, well, we all got to have our version of a Folsom Prison Blues. It's like, do you?
All right, here's our Elvis songs for this record.
We're gonna do the girl version of the country song. I guess I'm not bothered that much by people being worship acts.
Yeah. And I probably wouldn't even talk about it as much if they didn't literally say it themselves.
Yeah.
No, we wanted to do Husker Du and Mr. Burma together. That's what we wanted.
Yeah.
But I don't think it should be taken as a negative.
It's, for one, those are two incredible bands to aspire to.
Right. Like two of the best bands of all time. Punk bands of all time. Yeah.
And two bands that, like, frankly, there's not enough of.
There's really not.
And there's a lot of music, but there could be more. There could always be more.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a band like Moving Targets is like really successful. Is it's like, yes, there could be more of that sound, and these are original songs, and they have their own things to say, and they're great. They're super catchy, and they are awesome to listen to, and like cool drumming and awesome bass playing. Like it's just like, yeah, we're just gonna do more of that, and it's gonna be great as its own thing. And like, you know, I don't know. I don't think that it's, people talk about bands being derivative, and that has that negative connotation. And like, I understand that if there's no substance behind your influences, your inspiration, like if you're not able to actually work that into a good song on its own, and it's purely just, oh, we've got the sound, I get why people will latch on to the fact that you're trying to sound like someone else and make that out to be the negative thing. But everyone was trying to be somebody else.
Oh yeah, that's the basis of the entire DC scene.
Yeah.
Was just trying to sound like Minor Threat, then Embrace, then Fugazi.
That's all of rock music.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the Beatles, and then everyone who's influenced by the Beatles.
Yeah.
Because the Beatles were like, oh yeah, we're doing Little Richard, and we're doing, you know, who did Twisted Shout originally?
Chubby Checker.
Not the Top Notes. The Isley Brothers is the version.
Oh, yeah.
You know, there's just like, oh yeah, we're full on copying our influences.
I do want to talk about this record, like the actual songs on this record, a little more. It kicks off with the song Falling, which was one of the songs that was taken from Smash Pattern, which that it was like a cassette that they put out, wound up getting, no, I don't think it was even officially released. It might have just been like a demo they recorded, but they reissued it in 2018. I should go listen to that and see how that sounds. It could be like a lost Moving Targets record, but that song came from there. Excellent way to start this record off. A lot of stuff going on here. Like, I mean, they have a good producer working with them. Lou Giordano knows how to do a bunch of different kind of stuff. So like, it's got, you know, great bass, huge tom drums, really good build up, solid groove, some acoustic guitars in there, some gang vocals, some really good guitar leads. Like, Lou Giordano knows how to make a record at this stage, and he knows all the tricks to make it sound really good, because it sounds great.
It sounds huge.
Sounds
that beginning
so
bass and drums are just so heavy. Chorus is massive. Has that awesome like halftimey kind of breakdown. It's a great opener.
It goes into the first instrumental track. It's a great instrumental track. It's like a complete song. Just doesn't happen to not have vocals in it. Nothing Changes. Pick Scrape intro. Love that. Gotta love that. It's a really good driving song. It's one of the faster songs. Like it's picking up the pace for the record. It's followed into Things Are Going By.
A great case for my that Bay Area influence, because it sounds like a Jawbreaker or a Sam I Am song.
It could, yeah. It very much would fit. That song would have fit very much at home with that sound. Nothing Changes. That's the song we just talked about. Things Going By is a really good song. And then we get to my favorite song on the record, which is Car Crash. That is my absolute favorite song on this whole record. Kind of choppy. It's got a little Ramones feel to it. It's got a really fun chorus to it. Like, it's kind of, it feels like it could have been a single in and of itself. I don't know if they did too many singles as far as this record. They're not that kind of band though, and they're not on that kind of label to do a ton of singles.
The almost call and response kind of vocals on that at the end with the chugga 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 da 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 da, like, and then the other voice, like they ping pong back and forth in the headphones. Yeah, it is. That is one of the best songs for sure.
They did use Falling on a single in 1990. It's Away From Me, Falling, and Promises, which the only song off this record is Falling. So everything else is, that was probably for the next record. And then my next favorite song is next. It's Separate Hearts, which is like, it's a mid-pace song. It's even kind of slow at parts. It starts slow with like the bass intro, and then like the full band comes in, and I love how everybody comes in together here. Mid-pace song. It's got a really great melody to it. Like, it's a very dynamic song too. That one felt like the most Mission of Burma out of all of these songs to me. But even that one gave me some Minutemen vibes too. And then yeah, it just keeps going. Like, I won't go through every single song, but yeah, it's just great. It never lets up. to me, the weakest stuff is like Into the Forest might be the weakest song to me, but that one because it kind of feels like two songs mashed together into one song because it like starts really slow and it's like this entirely different thing, but then when it picks up in like the middle, it turns into a fast song and it's just like, oh, okay, you had an idea for like you had an intro, but you could never figure out how to make that into something as a whole song, and so you just kind of like mashed your other song idea together, which is fine too. Sometimes that makes it work, but to me that was like the most obvious, like, oh, okay, I see what happened here. Like it's just you wanted to use the idea, which if this is a record where they had to be coaxed into making it, that would make sense. It meant that they had all this stuff, they had all these songs,
Yeah.
and they're just like, I don't know what to do with it. We have all these songs now, what do we do with them? And they're like, well, I got these two ideas that I never could finish. You want to just mash them together? Yeah, I think that's how that song came about the way it was. And when you really think about it, the fact that they were like not planning on doing this record makes this record even better to me.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, we had all these songs and it's Falling, it's
It's
Car
Crash.
holy shit, you were just sitting on these? And I mean, I guess some of the, Falling was one that was pulled from the other band. So like,
Yeah,
I guess they had intentions of using it. And then, and who knows, like with stuff that could have been banked and it was just like, it'll find its way out somewhere. But
yeah, because he was doing other stuff. Like he started this band. If you look at what else did he do? He had another band. Let's see what it was called, because he was in Bullet La Volta at this time, which he was like, he talks about that band. He's like, it wasn't my band. I was writing stuff that fit that band's sound, but it wasn't the kind of stuff I wanted to write myself, which is why he winds up leaving Bullet La Volta so that he can go just write Moving Target stuff. He was in a band called American Pulverizer. Oh, that came out in 2004, so that's a later one. What's the other one? Bullet La Volta, Smash Pattern. The Steakheads. That's okay. That was like a one-off. They played one show in '86. It's all of them plus Al Quint from the band No System, Shatter Silence. But then he does solo records. Like he puts his first solo record out in 1991 while Moving Targets is still a thing. It comes out on City Slang. So like he was doing other stuff the whole time. I don't know where I was going with that. I don't know.
well, yeah, it's just that these songs probably weren't going to stay buried.
Right.
Would have been released as something else at some point, probably.
Yeah, he would have
seemed like he wanted to do other bands. It's just kind of the case of like, and it seems like with Moving Targets, it was just like, oh, people left, we broke up, someone moved away, so it's just the rotating members thing and the instability.
It was Pat Leonard. He was the original drummer who moved to Florida.
Or Pat Brady. Pat Leonard was bass.
Yeah.
Pat Brady was the drummer.
Yeah. Pat Leonard is who Chuck replaced.
Right.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because then eventually, like they do another record. I believe, he stays for the next record. What is that record called? Fall. Yeah, it's called Fall. That comes out in '91, and then he winds up leaving, and Pat Leonard comes back for Take This Ride, their '93 record. But that one, they even have a different drummer too. They have Jay Arcari on drums for that one, and then they wind up breaking up after that record. And then when they reunite in 2018, they reunited just to play some shows, and then they're like, "Hey, let's record some records." And so they've done 3 LPs since reuniting, and he's had a completely different lineup for those records too. Like it's Emilian Cantilano, who was in the Nils, and Yves Thibault. So like none of the Pats come back for the reunion. Chuck doesn't come back for the reunion. I assume it's just everybody. Oh, well, there's a reason for Pat Brady passed away in 2009 at 43, so that's why Pat didn't come back. He might have come back, but yeah, it's very much Ken's thing. It's Ken's band. Like it's his songs for the most part. I mean, he is the guitar player. They're a 3-piece, But yeah, I love this record. I definitely think it's underrated. I think it's not underrated. I think it's overlooked because I think the people who have heard it like it a lot. Like it's pretty they're pretty well regarded records. If you look at the Rate Your Music scores for all of their albums, Burning Waters got a 3.55, Brave Noises 3.49. Like everything is in the 3.4, 3.5 range. Like except for the newest one. For some reason that's got 3.23, but that record rules. So I don't know what those dorks are talking about.
It's Rate Your Music.
I mean, this is a case of a band too. This is the example of the reunion band that's as good as the previous output. And I'd say maybe even some of these new records might be better than the last 90s, the record from 93. Like that's the only one I don't think I've heard.
Yeah, for reference, if you're looking at Rate Your Music ratings, In the Dust has 3 ratings.
Yeah, right.
Humbucker had 7. So
we can probably fix that right now.
Yeah, you can bump those up.
I'm going to give it a 4. Off the top of my head, I'm going to give it a 4 just to give it a something. I didn't move it much.
And they're very active.
They are. They're very much an active band. Since reuniting, they are pretty busy.
They're going to Japan soon.
Yeah.
Maybe like next month.
Yeah. Japan tour. Yeah. That's got to be cool. Man, that's got to be cool. This could be a case, too, of them like having a bigger audience outside of the U.S. because they had like a good European audience after that first LP.
Yeah.
Good enough to make them go tour Europe. I don't know how much touring they did in the U.S. in the 80s. Maybe they did a lot more and it just wasn't really like talked about on these, or if they were just essentially local at that stage, but they play a lot now. They are very active, and it looks like they're working on another record already. Yeah, they had a Kickstarter in January. Is this right? Yeah, they put it up at the very end of the year, so they're already working on their next record, which they've crowdfunded their records. Which, yeah, sure, why not? Who cares?
Yeah,
it works. I have no problem with crowdfunding records. Like that's some people did at one point, and it kind of fell out of fashion for a little bit. But if the people want to pay for it in advance before it comes out, let them.
It turned into a weird. Crowdfunding got weird for a while. I think where people were just like crowdfunding everything, like every single thing, and like what you got in return for what you invested was like there's like, oh, you're gonna pay $50 and all you get is the LP.
Yeah.
I
think they've crowdfunded all of their new records, all the reunion records, but who cares? I mean, I think it's a case of they're not a huge band, so like they could probably use all the help they could get, and I bet you can get them all still from Dead Broke, like all the records they put out. So like Dead Broke's willing to put them out, put their name on them, probably distribute them for them because they like them. But is Dead Broke going to put money into it? I don't know if Dead Broke does money for records though either. They may not be that level band, level label. Maybe they used to, but yeah, I don't care. Let them do it. It works. They're all good records, so I don't know who would be upset by what they got from him. Yeah, looking at their discography, they have 7 records. Only one I've never heard, and they're all good. This is a band with just like a great discography, really standout albums that, due to circumstances, just never became like a huge band or get talked about on the level of their influences or even a lot of their contemporaries too. Because I did look at Tang in '89. They released that Bullet La Volta record. There's a Lemonheads record. There's a DYS record, and there's a Jerry's Kids record. So a little bit of old, new, old band, new band type thing going on. I mean, maybe if they sounded more like an old Boston hardcore band, they probably would have become more famous. But I don't like those bands.
Yeah,
I don't like the Boston hardcore bands for the most part. I like the stuff that comes out later. Well, I think I've talked about everything I have in my notes here. Is there anything else you want to say about the record?
No, I think that covers it.
Yeah. Let's give it a rating and get on out of here. I'm gonna give it a 4.25. That's where I'm going.
I'm the same. I think there's just like maybe one instrumental too.
I think it's a little long. I can't tell you exactly how long it is because it's compiled with both records.
Yeah. And I think could be sequenced better.
Maybe
it's a little front heavy.
That's true. The back half is a little light.
There's really good variety throughout the record, but I think like maybe too much of the like slower stuff is too close together on the B side.
Yeah.
So it kind of like throws off the pace of it. That's like the main complaint I would have is just like shuffle the order and maybe take out one instrumental, and it could be a really lean and great record. But they're a super consistent band, and everything I've heard has been really enjoyable. And I think every time I listen to them, I just kind of like come away liking them a little bit more and a little bit more. And I think that I'm always like, man, this record is so good. Why am I not listening to it more? It's just that's like every one of their records. I had just listened to Burning in Water like last month, and then like listening to Brave Noise for this episode, it just like keeps playing into
Mhm.
Burning in Water, and I probably listened to the like half of Burning in Water before I had to turn it off for whatever reason. So I could have easily continued listening to the first record again, and it was just like, yeah, I really like this part. I was like, oh, that song, that's really cool. I remember that. So it's just, they're a great band, and I enjoy everything I hear.
Yeah, this record is 35 minutes. So I mean, it's right there. Like that is like the max that I like think for a great record, typically. And combined, it's like an hour and 15 minutes with both records. So like I listened to both entirety while I was making notes for it, and then I started when I re-listened to it, I started to listen to the Burning in Water, but I wound up stopping just because I was like, I just listened to that one too. But that record is 39 minutes, so that one's actually a little longer. So, but yeah. All right. Well, I think that will do it for us. So thank you all so much for listening. You can follow us on all forms of social media at PunkLottoPod. We have an email, punklotopod@gmail.com, and our voicemail line, which is 202-688-PUNK, and patreon.com/punklotopod. So that will do it. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you next time.
To order Punk, call the number on your screen. Rush delivery is available. Remember, this special offer is not sold in stores.